Watchmen on the Pod. We're going to continue in our new book reading, Can It Happen Again? Chronicles of the Holocaust. We are in part 1, which is entitled, What Happened? 6 million were wiped off the face of the earth, and there is the danger that they also will be annihilated from our memories. Are they doomed to a twofold annihilation? Abraham Joshua Heschel. The Extermination of the Jews. The first 3 readings in this collection plunge the reader immediately into the physical world of the concentration camps. Be forewarned, much of the material is shocking and ugly, and it is intended to be so, for that is exactly what life in the camp was. The concentration camps were the device invented by German scientific geniuses to carry out the mass murder of millions of undesirables, quote unquote, with maximum efficiency and as little mess as possible. To secure cooperative behavior, the Nazis employed outright lies. They loaded on trains for shipment to the gas chambers. Loaded on the trains for shipment to the gas chambers were told that they were being resettled in labor camps in the East. Outside Germany, few people believed the reports that began trickling out about the existence of extermination camps. The very idea was preposterous. The first and third readings are from Bernard Neumann's book Auschwitz. The second reading is from William Shirer's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. The first 3 paragraphs of the Schreier piece are quotations from the testimony of Rudolf Höss, the commanding officer of Auschwitz. Auschwitz, a concentration camp. Bernard Neumann. With every step one took, one sank more deeply into the vicious mud. There was practically no water for washing. The prisoners slept on 3 tiers of wooden slabs, 6 to each tier, and for the most part, without any straw pallets. Roll call twice a day meant that the prisoners had to stand for hours in the wet, cold mud. When it rained, the prisoners had to lie on their wooden bunks in their wet garments. No wonder hundreds died daily. The guard towers around Auschwitz I and Birkenau formed the so-called small guard chain. They were not used during the day. Instead, the big guard chain encircled a huge perimeter encompassing most of the prisoners working in factories and in the fields, supervised by capos and foremen. Posters decorated with skulls and the warning, Auschwitz concentration camp area, do not cross this line. Fire will be opened without warning, dotted the big guard chain. But no such warnings were needed to keep civilians from approaching this eerie tract because of the ever-present threat of being suspected of trying to make contact with prisoners or of spying, charging that could land one in the camp. The work details outside the big guard chain were accompanied by as many guards as there were prisoners. At night, after all the work details had returned, the guards left the towers of the big guard chain and the small guard chain went into operation. The returning prisoners were counted by the block leaders at the block leader offices in front of every compound. If a prisoner was missing, the guards of the big chain remained at their post and a search party was sent out with dogs. Every now and then, however, a prisoner who had managed to steal away from his work detail succeeded in getting through the guards. Carol. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's see. Every now and then, however, a prisoner who had managed to steal away from his work detail succeeded in getting through the guards posted 100 feet apart and escaping. When that happened, the other prisoners were kept standing out in the open all night. And next morning, after spending the night in this fashion, they had to go right back to work. Because of the barbaric sanitary conditions and the completely inadequate diet, combined with the hard labor and other tortures, most prisoners died a miserable death a few weeks or at most months after their arrival. Even the women, dressed in Russian blouses and rags, had to perform heavy labor, such as carrying rocks and digging ditches. Only those who managed to become trustees and get assigned to one of the few better details were able to stay alive for longer periods. Auschwitz was an extermination camp, the biggest in all of history. Between 2 and 3 million Jews were murdered there in the course of time, as well as thousands of Poles, Russians, Czechs, and Yugoslavs, etc. The Death House, William L. Schreier. We had 2 SS doctors on duty at Auschwitz to examine the incoming transports of prisoners. These would be marched by one of the doctors who would make spot decisions as they walked by. Those who were fit to work were sent into the camp. Others were sent immediately to the extermination plants. Children of tender years were invariably exterminated, since by reason of their youth they were unable to work. Always, Herr Haas kept making improvements in the art of mass killing. Still another improvement we made over Treblinka was that at Treblinka, the victims almost always knew that they were to be exterminated, while at Auschwitz, we endeavored to fool the victims into thinking that they were to go through a delousing process. Of course, frequently they realized our true intentions, and we sometimes had riots and difficulties. Very frequently, women would hide their children under the clothes, but of course, when we found them, we would send the children in to be exterminated. We were required to carry out these exterminations in secrecy, but of course, the foul and nauseating stench from the continuous burning of bodies preeminated the entire area, and all of the people living in the surrounding communities knew that exterminations were going on at Auschwitz. The gas chambers themselves and the adjoining crematoria, viewed from a short distance, were not sinister looking places at all. It was impossible to make them out for what they were. Over them were well kept lawns with flower borders. The signs at the entrances merely said baths. The unsuspecting Jews thought they were simply being taken to the baths for the delousing, which was a customary at all camps, and taken to the accompaniment of sweet music. For there was light music, an orchestra of young and pretty girls, all dressed in white blouses and navy blue skirts, as one survivor remembered, and had been formed from among the inmates. While the selection was being made for the gas chambers, this unique musical ensemble played gay tunes from The Merry Widow and the Tales of Hoffmann. Nothing solemn and somber from Beethoven. The death marches at Auschwitz were sprightly and merry tunes straight out of Venice and Parisian operettas. To such music, recalling as it did happier and more frivolous times, the men, women, and children were led into the bathhouses, where they were told to undress preparatory to take a shower. Sometimes they were given towels. Once they were inside the shower room, and perhaps this was the first moment that they may have suspected something was amiss, for as many as 2,000 of them were packed into the chamber like sardines, making it difficult to take a bath. The massive doors were slid shut, locked, and hermetically sealed. Through heavy glass portals, the executioners could watch what happened. The naked prisoners below would be looking up at the showers from which no water spouted, or perhaps at the floor wondering why there was no drains. It took some moments for the gas to have much effect, but soon the inmates became aware that it was issuing from the perforations in the fence. It was then that they usually panicked, crowding away from the pipes, and finally stampeding toward the huge metal door, where, as Rettlinger puts it, they piled up in one blue, clammy, blood-splattered pyramid, clawing and mauling each other, even in death. 20 or 30 minutes later, when the huge mass of naked flesh had ceased to writhe, pumps drew out the poisonous gas, the large door was open, and the men of the Southern Commando took over. These were Jewish male inmates who were promised their lives and adequate food in return for performing the most ghastly job of all. Protected with gas masks and rubber boots and wielding hoses, they went to work. Rettlinger has described it. Their first task was to remove the blood and defecations before dragging the clawing dead apart with nooses and hooks. The prelude to the ghastly search for gold and the removal of teeth and hair, which were regarded by the Germans as strategic materials. Then the journey by lift or rail wagon to the furnaces, the mill that ground the clinker to fine ash, and the truck that scattered the ashes in the stream of the Sola. The horrors of daily life. Brend Newman. Billions of fleas tortured the prisoners in Auschwitz, and those who had shoes gave them away because the vermin prevented the use of this valuable possession. They who had only stockings or rags could at least scratch. The bugs didn't get much to eat, but still they were well nourished. In Birkenau, we didn't have fleas. Instead, we had rats. They gnawed not only at corpses, but also at the seriously sick. I have pictures showing women near death being bitten by rats. These animals were bold and impudent. They were not deterred by anything, and at night even helped themselves to the bread the prisoners had saved in their pockets from the evening meal, because at breakfast there was nothing except a coffee-like brew. Then the prisoners would often accuse each other of having stolen bread from each other, but it was the rats. Just enough so that one couldn't say it dripped. The morning washing up a row of wooden troughs under an iron pipe with holes through which was some water trickled. Just enough so that one couldn't say it dripped. Then one hurried to get to the latrine. There was a concrete trough across which lay boards with round holes. There was room for 200 to 300 at one sitting. Latrine details watched to see that no one stayed too long and used sticks to chase the prisoners away. But some couldn't move so quickly and others weren't through, and because of the strain, a portion of the rectum would still protrude. When the latrine detail hit them, they would run away and then once more get on line. There was no paper. Those who had jackets with linings would tear off a little piece at a time to clean themselves, or they would steal a piece from somebody during the night to have some in reserve. The wastewater of the washrooms was piped into the latrines to wash away the excrement. But again and again, there were major stoppages, especially in places where the water pressure wasn't strong enough. When that happened, a terrible stench spread throughout. Then shit details, would come to pump out the mess. The people in the camp were so hungry that if a bit of soup spilled over, the prisoners would come running from all sides like a swarm of wasps, converge on the spot, dig their spoons into the mud, and stuff the mess into their mouths. Hunger and extreme want made them into animals. It is almost impossible to imagine that a government would cold-bloodedly plan to destroy an entire people, innocent and defenseless, and yet that was exactly the intention of Hitler's regime in Germany. All the complex and costly machinery of the concentration camps was used for that purpose. As Lucy Dowadowitz makes clear in this selection from her book, The War Against the Jews, the destruction of the Jews was no mere side effect of the war. It was a carefully planned objective. Hitler's maniacal dream of world domination called for total annihilation of the Jews. In order for Germany to rule the world, he felt he had to first make the German people racially pure, and that requiring purging it of internal enemies, chief among whom he listed the Jews. The final solution of the Jewish question. Lucy Dowadowitz. The final solution of the Jewish question was the code name assigned by the German bureaucracy to the annihilation of the Jews. The very composition of the code name, when analyzed, reveals its fundamental character and meaning to the Germans who invented and used it. The term Jewish question, at first used during the early Enlightenment emancipation period in Western Europe, referred to the question or problem that the anomalous persistence of the Jews as a people posed to the new nation states and the rising political nationalism. The Jewish question was, at bottom, a euphemism whose verbal neutrality concealed the user's impatience with the singularity of this people that did not appear to conform to the new political demands of the state. Since a question demands an answer and a problem a solution, various answers and solutions were propounded to the Jewish question by foes and even friends, that entailed the disappearance of the Jews as such, abandonment of the Jewish religion or its essential elements, of the Jewish language, Yiddish, of Jewish culture, Jewish uniqueness, and separatism. The histories of Jewish emancipation and of European anti Semitism are replete with proffered solutions to the Jewish question. The classic illustration is the solution offered by Constantine, and I really cannot say this person's name, Pobodanostov, chief advisor to Tsar Alexander III in 1881. One third of the Jews were to immigrate, one third to convert, and one third to die of hunger. To this concept that the National Socialists adopted, they added one new element embodied in the word final. Final means definitive, completed, perfected, ultimate. Final reverberates with apocalyptic promise, bespeaking the last judgment, the end of days, the last destruction before salvation, Armageddon. The final solution of the Jewish question and the National Socialist conception was not just another anti Semitic undertaking, but a meta-historical program devised with an eschatological perspective. It was part of a salvational ideology that envisioned the attainment of heaven by bringing hell on earth. The devil is loose. Frederick Reck Malazwin noted in his diary on October 30th, 1942. The most important event of our time, Andre Malraux said, was Le Retour de Satan, citing the German system of terror. To attain its heavenly hell on earth, the German dictatorship launched a war that engulfed the whole world. Over 35 million people were killed, more than half of them civilians. On the battlefields, 1 out of every 22 Russians was killed, 1 out of every 25 Germans, 1 out of every 150 Italians and Englishmen, and 1 out of every 200 Frenchmen. The human cost of 2,191 days of war surpassed the losses of any previous war in the world. That war brought death to nearly 6 million Jews, to 2 out of every 3 European Jews. Though one third of them managed to survive, though the Jewish people and Judaism have outlived the Third Reich, the Germans nevertheless succeeded in irrecoverably destroying the life and culture of East European Jewry. The final solution transcended the bounds of modern historical experience. Never before in modern history had one people made the killing of another the fulfillment of an ideology, in whose pursuit means were identical with ends. History has, to be sure, recorded terrible massacres and destruction that one people perpetuated against one another, but all, however cruel and unjustifiable, were intended to achieve instrumental ends, being means to ends, not ends in themselves. The German state, deciding that the Jews should not live, arrogated to itself the judgment as to whether a whole people had the right to existence, a judgment that no man and no state have the right to make. Anyone who, on the basis of such a judgment, said Karl Jaspers, plans the organized slaughter of a people and participates in it, does something that is fundamentally different from all crimes that have existed in the past. To carry out this judgment, designated as the final solution, the German dictatorship involved and engaged the entire bureaucratic and functional apparatus of the German state and the National Socialist movement, and employed the best available technological means. Did that totally wrong. And the National Socialist movement and employed the best available technological means. The final solution destroyed the East European Jews. In doing so, it subverted fundamental moral principles in every system of law that had governed, however imperfectly, human society for millennia. What the Nazis did is fact, history. The evidence exists in eyewitness accounts that fill thousands of pages of testimony. The next two readings are descriptions of actual executions by Germans who were there on the scene. What those accounts reveal about the behavior of all concerned, the victims, the murderers, the passive observers themselves, is that a kind of mass hypnosis seems to have had already everyone in its grip. The first account is from the testimony of a Nazi official assigned to work on the gas chambers at a camp in southern Poland. The excerpt is from the book The Harvest of Hate by Leon Polakov. The final solution in action testimony. This account is taken from the testimony of one of the Nazis' executioners responsible for putting into effect Hitler's final solution to Germany's race problem. The site of the extermination camp he describes was Belzec, a village in southern Poland. Before this man could be brought to trial, he committed suicide. Globovnik said, Your duty will be to improve the workings of our gas chambers, which operate on the exhaust from a diesel engine. We need a more toxic and faster working gas. The Fuhrer has ordered more speed. Dr. Herbert Lindner, who was here yesterday, asked me, wouldn't it be more prudent to burn the bodies instead of burying them? Another generation might take a different view of these things, I answered. Gentlemen, if there is ever a generation after us so cowardly, so soft, that it would not understand our work as good and necessary, then, gentlemen, National Socialism will have been for nothing. On the contrary, we should bury bronze tablets saying that it was we who had the courage to carry out this gigantic task. The next day, we left for Belzec. The following morning, a little before 7, there was an announcement. The first train will arrive in 10 minutes. A few minutes later, a train arrived from Limburg. 45 cars with more than 6,000 people. 200 Ukrainians assigned to this work flung open the doors and drove the Jews out of the cars with leather whips. A loudspeaker gave instructions: strip even artificial limbs and glasses. Hand all money and valuables in at the valuables window. Then the march began. Barbed wire on both sides. In the rear, 24 Ukrainians with rifles. They drew near. Rith and I found ourselves in front of the death chambers. Stark naked women, men, children, cripples passed by. A tall SS man in the corner called to the unfortunates in a loud minister's voice, Nothing is going to hurt you. Just breathe deep and it will strengthen your lungs. It's a way to prevent contagious diseases. It's a good disinfectant. They asked him what was going to happen, and he answered, the men will have to work, build houses and streets. The women won't have to do that. They will be busy with the housework and the kitchen. This was the last hope for some of these poor people, enough to make them march toward the death chambers without resistance. The majority knew everything. The smell betrayed it. They climbed a little wooden stairs and entered the death chambers, most of them silently, pushed by those behind them. SS men pushed the men into the chambers. Fill it up, Rith ordered. 700 to 800 people in 93 square meters. The doors closed. SS Uttenschich. Oh, see, I probably can't say his name. Utter Shahafor. I don't know. Heckenholt tried to start the motor. It wouldn't start. My stopwatch clocked it all 50 minutes, 70 minutes. The diesel still would not start. The men were waiting in the gas chambers. You could hear them weeping as though in a synagogue. The diesel started up after 2 hours and 49 minutes by my stopwatch. 25 minutes passed. You could see through the window that many were already dead, for an electric light illuminated the interior of the room. All were dead after 32 minutes. Jewish workers on the other side opened the wooden doors. They had been promised their lives in return for doing this horrible work, plus a small percentage of money and valuables collected. The men were still standing, like columns of stone, with no room to fall or lean. Even in death, you could tell the families, all holding hands. It was difficult to separate them while emptying the rooms for the next batch. The bodies were tossed out. 24 workers were busy checking mouths, which they opened with iron hooks. Gold to the left, no gold to the right. Dentists knocked out gold teeth, bridges, and crowns with hammers. Captain Rith stood in the middle of them. He was in his element. From September 1941 until January 1944, Hermann Friedrich Graub was manager and engineer in charge of a branch office in Sobonau, the Ukraine, of a German building firm. In this capacity, it was his job to visit the building sites of the firm. Under contract to an army construction office, the firm had orders to erect grain storage buildings on the former airport of Dubanu, the Ukraine. The Grab Memoriam. No, I'm saying that so wrong. Memorandum. The Garb Memorandum Testimony. On October 5th, 1942, when I visited the building office at Dabano, my foreman, Herbert Moneix, told me that in the vicinity of the site, Jews from Dabano had been shot in 3 large pits, each about 30 meters long and 3 meters deep. About 1,500 persons had been killed daily. All of the 5,000 Jews who had still been living in Dabanu before the pogrom were to be liquidated. As the shootings had taken place in his presence, he was still much upset. Thereupon, I drove to the site accompanied by Mononykes and saw near it great mounds of earth about 30 meters long and 2 meters high. Armed Ukrainian militia drove the people off the trucks under the supervision of an SS man. The militiamen acted as guards on the trucks and drove them to and from the pit. All these people had the regulation yellow patches on the front and back of their clothes and thus could be recognized as Jews. Mononykes and I went directly to the pits. Nobody bothered us. Now I heard rifle shots in quick succession from behind one of the earth mounds. The people who had got off the trucks, men, women, and children of all ages, had to undress upon the order of an SS man who carried a riding or dog whip. They had to put down their clothes in fixed places, sorted according to shoes, top clothing, and underclothing. I saw a heap of shoes of about 800 to 1,000 pairs, great piles of underlinen and clothing. Without screaming or weeping, these people undressed, stood around in family groups, kissed each other, said farewell, waited for a sign from another SS man, who took near the pit also with a whip in his hand. During the 15 minutes that I stood near the pit, I heard no complaint or plea for mercy. I watched a family of about 8 persons, a man and a woman, both about 50, with their children of about 1, 8, and 10, and 2 grown-up daughters of about 20 to 24. An old woman with snow white hair was holding the 1-year-old child in her arms and singing to it and tickling it. The child was cooing with delight. The couple were looking on with tears in their eyes. The father was holding the hand of a boy about 10 years old, and speaking to him softly. The boy was fighting his tears. The father pointed toward the sky, stroked his head, and seemed to explain something to him. At that moment, the SS man at the pit shouted something to his comrade. The latter counted off about 20 persons and instructed them to go behind the earth mound. Among them was the family which I have mentioned. I well remember a girl, slim, with black hair, who, as she passed close to me, pointed to herself and said, 23. I walked around the mound and found myself confronted by a tremendous grave. People were closely wedged together and lying on top of each other so that only their heads were visible. Nearly all had blood running over their shoulders from their heads. Some of the people shot were still moving. Some were lifting their arms and turning their heads to show that they were still alive. The pit was already 2/3 full. I estimated that it already contained about 1,000 people. I looked for the man who did the shooting. He was an SS man who sat at the edge of the narrow end of the pit, his feet dangling into the pit. He had a Tommy gun on his knees, and he was smoking a cigarette. The people, completely naked, went down some steps which were cut in the clay wall of the pit and clambered over the heads of the people lying there. Completely naked, went down some steps. Oh, I said that, I'm sorry. And clambered over the heads of the people lying there to the place where the SS man directed them. They lay down in front of the dead or injured people. Some caressed those who were still alive and spoke to them in a low voice. Then I heard a series of shots. I looked into the pit and saw that the bodies were twitching, or the heads lying already motionless on top of the bodies that lay before them. Blood was running from their necks. I was surprised that I was not ordered away, but I saw that there were 2 or 3 postmen in uniform nearby. The next batch was approaching already. They went down into the pit, lined themselves up against the previous victims, and were shot. When I walked back around the mound, I noticed another truckload of people which just arrived. This time it included sick and infirm people. An old, very thin woman with terribly thin legs was undressed by others who were already naked, and while 2 people held her up, the woman appeared to be paralyzed. The naked people carried the woman around the mound. I left with Mononiques and drove in my car back to Dubano. On the morning of the next day, when I again visited the site, I saw about 30 naked people lying near the pit, about 30 to 50 meters away from it. Some of them were still alive. They looked straight in front of them with a fixed stare and seemed to notice neither the chilliness of the morning nor the workers of firm who stood around. A girl of about 20 spoke to me and asked me to give her clothes and to help her escape. At that moment, we heard a fast car approach, and I noticed that it was an SS detail. I moved away to my site. 10 minutes later, we heard shots from the vicinity of the pit. The Jews still alive had been ordered to throw the corpses into the pit. Then they themselves had to lie down in this to be shot in the neck. The effects of prolonged brutal treatment and physical deprivation are vividly drawn in this excerpt from Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Dr. Frankl, a Vietnamese psychiatrist, was imprisoned in Auschwitz for 3 years. He survived, but his wife and most other members of his family perished in the camp. Dehumanization and starvation. Viktor E. Frankl. Suddenly there was a stir among my fellow travelers who had been standing about with pale, frightened faces, helplessly debating. Again we heard the hoarsely shouted commands. We were driven with blows into the immediate anteroom of the bath. There we assembled around an SS man who waited until we had all arrived. Then he said, "I will give you 2 minutes, and I shall time you by my watch. In these 2 minutes, you will get fully undressed, drop everything on the floor where you are standing. You will take nothing with you except your shoes, your belt or suspenders, and possibly a truss. I am starting to count now." With unthinkable haste, people tore off their clothes. As the time grew shorter, they became increasingly nervous and pulled clumsily at their underwear, belts, and shoelaces. Then we heard the first sounds of whipping, leather straps beating down on the naked bodies. Next, we were herded into another room to be shaved. Not only our heads were shorn, but not a hair was left on our entire bodies. Then to the showers, where we lined up again. We hardly recognized each other, but with great relief, some people noted that real water dripped from the sprays. While we were waiting for the shower, our nakedness was brought home to us. We really had nothing now except our bare bodies, even minus hair. All we possessed, literally, was our was our naked existence. During the latter part of our imprisonment, the daily ration consisted of very watery soup given out once daily, and the usual small bread rations. In addition to that, there was the so called extra allowance, consisting of 3/4 of an ounce of margarine, or of a slice of poor quality sausage, or of a little piece of cheese, or a bit of synthetic honey, or a spoonful of watery jam, varying daily. In calories, this diet was absolutely inadequate, especially taking into consideration our heavy manual work and our constant exposure to the cold in inadequate clothing. The sick who were under special care, that is, those who were allowed to lie in the huts instead of leaving the camp for work, were even worse off. When the last layers of subcutaneous fat had vanished and we looked like skeletons disguised with skin and rags, we could watch our bodies beginning to devour themselves. The organisms digested its own protein and the muscles disappeared. Then the body had no powers of resistance left. One after another, the members of the little community in our hut died. Each of us could calculate with fair accuracy whose turn would be next and when his own would come. Prison camps of various kinds, well over 100 by the end of the war, played a key role in the Nazi program to dispose of all people regarded as undesirables. They were all located in Germany or Poland. In the middle 1930s, the camps were used mainly for internment or protective custody of communists, on other political dissidents, homosexuals, the handicapped, and other non-Aryans. After 1939, many camps were used largely for forced labor. Jews and other prisoners living at starvation levels worked in German farms and war factories. The thousands of prisoners died of starvation, exposure, and illness. Countless others were shot to death. Following adoption of the final solution plan in 1941, 6 special camps, those marked with an X on the map, were equipped with gas chambers and crematoria. Auschwitz, the largest of these extermination camps, accounted for some 2 million deaths in a 2.5-year period. A worker at Auschwitz said that the stench given off by the pyres, Pyres, contaminated the surrounding countryside. At night, the red sky over Auschwitz could be seen for miles. Yet people living in the vicinity of these camps claimed to know nothing of their existence. Flow chart for Operation Reinhard, Auschwitz, and Majdanek. This flowchart depicts the operation of 2 concentration camps, Auschwitz and Majdanek, both in Poland and among those sites especially designed to be killing factories. The diagram is reminiscent of those used by business and industry to streamline operations and maximize efficiency. In this case, the production was centered around the processing and preparation of human beings for death. I'm going to show you this as I read so you can see what it's talking about, okay? Hopefully you can see that. And the byproducts of the dead, that is their hair, teeth, eyeglasses, and even their skin, were processed for future use in the manufacture of such household goods as carpet, lampshades, and soap. Did the men and women who ran these factories consider their raw materials as human? Try to imagine as you follow the chart what must have been in their minds and hearts of these planners and executioners, most of whom were well-trained technicians, but most likely not aware that their skills would someday be applied to operating factories of death. So there's that, guys. That's the flow chart. All right, let me see. As soon as Hitler came to power in 1933, he began to put into effect various laws and regulations that deprived the Jews, bit by bit, of their rights and property. It was all done legally because Hitler had absolute power. To stifle protest or criticism from Jew or non-Jew, armed stormtroopers were free to use violence and imprisonment. Particularly at the beginning, could anyone be certain where the chain of action would lead? This chronology was compiled from two sources, Frederick by Hans Peter Richter and The Destruction of the European Jews by Roel Hilberg. Chronologically of laws and actions directed against Jews in Nazi Germany, 1933 to 1945. Dates given for laws, decrees, and regulations are dates of public announcement. 1933, January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of the German Reich. He is the supreme leader of the NSDAP, National Socialist German Workers' Party, and the SA Stormtroopers. March 5th, 1933, Adolf Hitler receives a strong vote of confidence from the German people in the Reichstagswahl parliamentary elections. March 24th, 1933, the Reichstag, German parliament, empowers Hitler to enact laws on its behalf. April 1st, 1933, Adolf Hitler proclaims a one-day boycott of all Jewish shops. April 7th, 1933, all non-Aryan civil servants, with the exception of soldiers, are forcibly retired. April 21st, 1933, kosher butchering is forbidden by law. April 25th, 1933, fewer non-Aryan children are admitted to German schools and universities. June 16th, 1933, there are 500,000 Jews living in the Third Reich. July 14th, 1933, German nationality can be revoked for those considered undesirable by the government. 1934, August 2nd, 1934, Paul von Hindenburg, second president of the German Republic, dies. August 3rd, 1934, Adolf Hitler declares himself both president and chancellor of the Third Reich. 1935, March 16th, 1935, compulsory military service is reinstituted in Germany in open defiance of the Versailles Treaty. September 6th, 1935, Jewish newspapers can no longer be sold in the street. September 15th, 1935, Nuremberg laws deprive Jews of German citizenship and reduce them to the status of subjects, forbid marriage or any sexual relations between Jews and Aryans, forbid Jews to employ Aryan servants under the age of 35. 1936, March 7th, 1936, Jews no longer have the right to participate in parliamentary elections. The German army reoccupies the Rhineland. August 1st, 1936, the Olympic Games are opened in Berlin. Signs reading Jews not welcome are temporarily removed from most public places by order of the Führer to present a favorable and misleading picture to foreign tourists. 1937, July 2nd, 1937, more Jewish students are removed from German schools and universities. November 16th, 1937, Jews can obtain passports for travel abroad only in special cases. 1938, March 11th, German troops march into Austria. July 6th, Jews may no longer follow certain occupations such as broker, matchmaker, tourist guide, real estate agent. July 23rd, as of January 1st, 1939, all Jews must carry identification cards. July 25th, as of September 30th, 1938, Jewish doctors can be regarded only as medical attendants. July 27th, all Jewish street names are replaced. August 17th. As of January 1st, 1939, all Jews must have only Jewish first names. If a Jew has a German first name, Israel or Sarah must be added to it. October 5th, Jewish passports are marked with a J. October 28th, about 15,000 stateless Jews are resettled in Poland. November 7th, Herschel Grunspun, a Jew, attempts to assassinate the German attaché von Rath in Paris. November 9th, von Rath dies. Goebbels, recognizing the propaganda value, issues instructions that spontaneous demonstrations against Jews are to be organized and executed throughout Germany in retaliation. The pogrom begins. November 10th, 1938, pogrom continues. November 11th, Jews may no longer own or bear arms. Destruction of synagogues in entire Reich. November 12th, following the Nazi organized pogrom, reparations of 1 billion Reichsmarks are imposed on the German Jews, and they must further repair all damages at their own cost. Jews may no longer have businesses. Jews may no longer attend plays, movies, concerts, and exhibitions. November 15th, all Jewish children remaining in German schools are removed to Jewish schools. November 23rd, all Jewish businesses are closed down. November 28th, Jews may no longer be in certain districts at certain times. December 3rd, local authorities allowed to bar Jews from streets on Nazi holidays. Jews must hand in driver's license and car registrations. Jews must sell their businesses, real estate, and hand over their securities and jewelry. December 8th, Jews may no longer attend universities. 1939, March 15th, German troops march on Czechoslovakia. April 30th, rent protection for Jews is reduced. May 17th, about 215,000 Jews still live in the Third Reich. September 1st, Germany declares war on Poland. September 3rd, World War II begins. Curfew for Jews is instituted 9 p.m. in summer, 8 p.m. in winter. September 21st, pogroms against Jews in Poland. September 23rd, all Jews must hand in their radios to the police. October 12th, Austrian Jews are beginning to be deported to Poland. October 19th, reparations for German Jews are increased to 1.25 billion Reichsmarks and are now payable by November 15th, 1939. November 23rd, Polish Jews must now wear yellow stars of David. 1940, February 6th. Unlike the rest of the German people, Jews do not receive clothing coupons. February 12th, German Jews begin to be taken into protective custody, that is, deported to concentration camps. July 29th, Jews may no longer have telephones. December 24th, Jews to pay special income tax. 1941, June 12th, Jews must designate themselves as unbelievers. July 31st, beginning of the final solution. September 1st, every Jew in Germany must also wear a Star of David. Jews may no longer leave their places of residence without permission of the police. October 14th, friendly relations with Jews prohibited. The large-scale deportation of Jews to concentration camps begin. October 24th, friendly relations with Jews prohibited. December 26th, Jews may no longer use public telephones. 1942, January 1st, approximately 130,000 Jews now live in the Third Reich. January 10th, Jews must hand in any woolen and fur clothing still in their possession. February 17th, Jews may no longer subscribe to newspapers or magazines. April 17th, a Jewish apartment must be identified as such with a Star of David beside the nameplate. April 24th, Jews are forbidden the use of public transportation. May 15th, Jews are forbidden to keep dogs, cats, birds, etc. May 29th, Jews are no longer permitted to visit barbershops. June 9th, Jews must hand over all spare clothing. June 11th, Jews no longer receive smoking coupons. June 19th. Jews must hand over all electrical and optical equipment as well as typewriters and bicycles. June 20th. All Jewish schools are closed. July 17th. Blind or deaf Jews may no longer wear armbands identifying their condition in traffic. September 9th. Jews not permitted to institute civil suits. September 18th. Jews can no longer buy meat, eggs, or milk. October 4th. All Jews still in concentration camps in Germany are to be transferred to extermination camp Auschwitz. 1943, April 21st. Jews found guilty of crimes are to be conveyed to extermination camps in Auschwitz or Lublin after serving their sentences. July 1st. Property of Jews to be confiscated after his death. 1944, September 4th. On 1st. Approximately 15,000 Jews now live in the Third Reich. 1945, January 17th. Soviet troops liberate Warsaw. February 4th through the 11th. Yalta Conference in the Crimea. March 5th. American troops reach the Rhine River. April 11th. American troops liberate Buchenwald death camp. April 15th, British troops liberate Bergen-Belsen death camp. April 25th, American and Soviet troops meet in the Elbe River. April 30th, Hitler commits suicide. May 7th, Germany surrenders unconditionally, end of the war in Europe. August 15th, Japan surrenders unconditionally, end of the World War II. November 22nd, Nuremberg War Crime Tribunal commences. The Nuremberg trials conclude on October 1st, 1946, which happens to be the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, with a judgment in which 12 defendants are sentenced to death, 3 to life imprisonment, 4 to various prison terms, and 3 acquitted. And I'm going to end that there, and that's where I ended last night too, it looks like. So, all right. Can it happen again? Chronicles of the Holocaust. Brothers and sisters, I dare say it's going to, and it's going to be worse. And it's not going to be the Jews, but it's going to be the Christians. It's coming. It says in the Word of God that there's going to be a time that, He's going to overcome the saints. It's pretty scary. But God is with us. Keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God, and embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. I love you all. Bye-bye.